I don't know how many words have been written and books have been published about prayer. I did go out this morning and do a quick Google search on my computer, and I found out that at a minimum, there are some 75 million plus references to prayer on the internet, and that doesn't count the images. There are books that will talk about the theological nature of prayer, and there are books that talk about the doctrinal differences in terms of how we understand prayer. There are books that will tell you what prayer will produce, and there are books that will tell you how to pray. And then there is book after book after book that is just printed prayers that you could use so that you don't have to make up your own. Words and words and words about prayer. One of the things that's always concerned me, I guess, is that prayer as a discipline is such a personal thing that we all tend to look at it differently, and so we have difficulty finding a common language to use when we're examining prayer, especially as a Lenten discipline around being a disciple. I'll give you some examples just from that quick internet search I did this morning. One person said that prayer is the key. You ready for this? Prayer is the key to all the treasures of this life and the life hereafter. That's pretty powerful stuff. Somebody else said that prayer changes things. And then somebody altered that a little bit and said, well, prayer doesn't change things, prayer fixes everything. Which, of course, then makes prayer this Band-Aid that you put on the brokenness of life, I guess. One person wrote, prayer is how to do nothing and still think you're helping. I love that one. Prayer is how to do nothing and still think you're helping. One was an image that simply had prayer and then an equal sign and then the word peace. Would you like to know what was the one right next to it? Prayer. This means war. And it was a request to develop prayer warriors within the church. I have heard prayers that were prayers, and then some of the prayers that I've heard that have bothered me the most, some of the prayers I've probably prayed that bothered me the most weren't really prayers at all. They were sermons neatly disguised as a dear Lord at the beginning and an amen at the end to make you think the prayer wasn't really preaching at you, he was just praying. An amazing thing, this thing that we call prayer. I'm convinced as we move through Lent and we look at the spiritual disciplines that make us disciples of Jesus Christ, that we need, if we're going to be disciples in community, to find some understanding of prayer that can bind us together so that we can be a community of faith, a church that in the midst of the world is representative of Jesus Christ in serving God. Now, sometimes we try to find that by giving us easy-to-remember acronyms. One of the really great ones on the internet this morning was prayer, ASAP. Stands for Always Say a Prayer. And then there's one that a lot of us grew up with in terms of remembering the kinds of prayer, ACTS, adoration, confession, thanksgiving, and supplication. And while those are important in terms of helping us understand prayer life, I'm not sure they give us that common thread that allows us to be a community of faith. So I want to turn to what my Bible says is a prayer of David, the 90th Psalm. Because if you read that psalm and if you listen to it closely this morning, you realize it's a psalm that kind of comes out of two different worlds. David begins by saying, Lord, you have been our dwelling place in all generations. David begins the prayer by talking about a relationship that David and the people have had with God for all generations and that God has had with them. The prayer begins not with brokenness, not with fixing things, not with changing things. It is not a proclamation of either peace or war. It is instead a statement of, for David, a fact. that the thing that characterizes us as followers of God is that we are in relationship with God and God is in relationship with us. That's where he starts the prayer. About 2/3 of the way through it. After leaving that theme to talk about all of the sin and all of the brokenness and all of the problems and all of the mortality in the world, all of a sudden he says, "Return, O Lord." See, in those 3 brief words, what he is saying is, God, in the midst of everything that pulls us away from you, that changes our focus and shifts our focus away from the covenant God, the thing we desire most is that you return to us, that somehow that relationship, that connection is reestablished. And then he ends this amazing prayer by saying, "Let the favor of the Lord our God be upon us." That somehow this relationship makes a difference because amidst all of the difficulties of life, the sin, the brokenness, the mortality, it is God's favor in us and through us and resting on us that makes all the difference in the world. I will admit that in my Google search this morning, amongst all of the things about prayer that I find problematic at best, there was one poster that said, "Prayer is the link that connects us to God." And maybe for me, that's the common thing that the people of God ought to take with them about the nature of prayer. When you look at all the different ways that we pray and the reasons that we pray and what we expect to get out of prayer, maybe the power of prayer for a disciple is that it keeps us linked to and in relationship with God. So that when we talk about the brokenness of life, we are not living in that brokenness alone, but God is with us. That when we wake up and realize that we have reached that 70 or even 80 by dint of strength and gone beyond that, when we are facing our own mortality and the mortality of those that love us, we do not do so alone because we are linked in connection with God, who has been our dwelling place from all generations and who, at the drop of an invitation, will return to us. I am one of those people who is always tempted to use prayer to get what I want, to change things or fix things, usually to change people or fix people, not me. I don't know whether any of you are the same way or not. Maybe as a disciple of Jesus Christ, the issue is to have an interior spiritual discipline of prayer that keeps us connected with God. So that when things aren't changed the way I want them, when things aren't fixed the way I desire them, when you aren't the kind of people I expect you to be, when I'm not the kind of person I expect me to be, I know that I am not alone because my God is with me. That's easy to forget. But you see, I'm convinced that if prayer is that thing that connects us to God, as I believe David confessed in his prayer, then all of a sudden, this path of discipleship that I walk, I do not walk alone. And all the difficulties of being a disciple of Jesus Christ in the midst of the world, I do not bear by myself because God is with me. And of course, as United Methodists, our purpose is to make disciples for the transformation of the world. And to make disciples is to pray for and with others so that they too might know that perhaps the most important thing about who we are and who God is that we can live in relationship every moment of every day, from the moment we are born until the day we draw our last breath on this earth and on into eternity forever. Because God chooses to be our covenant God and live in relationship with us. We affirm that. We beg for that in some cases when we feel separated from God. We pray that as that which holds us and sustains us in the midst of each day. We are in relationship and connected to God in a lot of different places in a lot of different ways. We are connected to the God of the empty tomb. Eventually, we are in relationship and in the presence of the God of the throne. But we are also called to be connected to it in the presence of the God of the cross, and we move ever closer to that during Lent. So we invite you to stand now. We're not going to do our prayer. We're going to move directly to the closing hymn. We invite you to stand as you are able. Let us sing together Beneath the Cross of Jesus. It's 297, and the hymnals will be on the screen.